Before we start, take 1 second to support this channel. Hit subscribe and like. It truly helps us keep uncovering the stories others won't tell. Your support makes a real difference. Now, let's begin.
It beats a federal murder rap. They'll stalk those ridges until there isn't a still left in Kentucky or Tennessee.
You don't have a favorite Robert Mitchum film?
No, I don't think so. I don't.
Before his passing, Robert Mitchum quietly dropped a revelation that sent a ripple through old Hollywood circles, especially when it involved Charlton Heston. It wasn't shouted from a stage or packaged for headlines. It was the kind of truth that surfaces late, when reputations are already set in stone, and nothing is left to gain by pretending. To understand why Mitchum's words carried so much weight, you have to understand where he came from. Born Robert Charles Derman Mitchum on August 6, 1917, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Mitchum didn't grow up with privilege, polish, or protection. There were no studio connections waiting for him, no safety net, no easy path. His childhood was marked by instability from the start. His father worked dangerous, physically demanding jobs and died when Mitchum was still young, leaving his mother to hold the family together under constant financial strain. As a result, Mitchum grew up fast. He bounced from place to place, learned to rely on himself, and absorbed the kind of hard lessons that never leave you. That early chaos didn't break him. It shaped him. It gave him an edge, a toughness, and a deep skepticism toward authority that would later define both his career and his reputation. When Mitchum arrived in Hollywood, he didn't arrive as a star. He arrived as a worker. He took odd jobs, worked as a laborer and a stunt performer, and accepted whatever small roles he could find. There was nothing glamorous about it, but people began to notice something different about him. His voice carried weight. His presence felt grounded. He didn't act like he needed approval, and that alone made casting directors pay attention. By the mid-1940s, films like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and Undercurrent made it clear Mitchum wasn't just another contract player. He brought something raw and unpolished to the screen. While many stars of the era leaned into dramatic gestures and exaggerated emotion, Mitchum did the opposite. He pulled back. He stayed quiet. And somehow, that restraint made him more powerful. That approach changed everything. In 1947, his role as Jeff Bailey in Out of the Past cemented his place in film history. Mitchum didn't play the detective as a hero or a villain. He played him as a man caught in moral fog, weighed down by choices he couldn't undo. The performance didn't shout for attention, but it lingered. It made audiences lean in. From that point on, Mitchum became the face of the anti-hero. He mastered tension through stillness, a pause, a look, a line delivered like it didn't matter, even when it mattered most. Beneath that calm exterior was emotional gravity, and it pulled people in whether they realized it or not. He wasn't performing characters, he was inhabiting them. His range often gets overlooked because of his brooding image, but Mitchum was far from one note. He moved comfortably through westerns, war films, thrillers, and even lighter roles. In The Night of the Hunter, his portrayal of preacher Harry Powell remains one of the most unsettling performances ever put on film. There was no shouting, no overacting, just quiet menace that stayed with you long after the screen went dark. At the same time, films like The Story of G.I. Joe revealed a softer side, warmth, humor, humanity. Mitchum could shift gears effortlessly, proving his image wasn't a limitation, it was a choice. Off-screen, Mitchum was just as unpredictable. He had little patience for Hollywood politics and even less respect for artificial behavior. Studio executives never quite knew what to do with him. He was sharp-tongued, dryly funny, and completely uninterested in playing the part of a grateful star. His reputation as a rebel grew alongside his fame, fueled by run-ins with the law, a love of poetry, fishing, and a refusal to follow anyone else's rules. Yet despite the legend, Mitchum often pulled away from the spotlight. He preferred quiet to noise, distance to attention. Nothing about that felt manufactured. Audiences sensed it. His authenticity came through in every role because it wasn't something he switched on for the camera. That honesty influenced generations of actors. Co-stars often said Mitchum barely needed direction. He understood rhythm, timing, and restraint instinctively. In an era dominated by big speeches and dramatic flair, his minimalism felt revolutionary. A single look from Mitchum could say more than an entire monologue. In 1940, long before his fame peaked, Mitchum married Dorothy Spence. Their relationship would last nearly 60 years, quietly anchoring his turbulent life. Dorothy wasn't interested in Hollywood glamour. She was steady, resilient, and grounded. Qualities Mitchum relied on more than he ever admitted publicly. They raised 3 children together while navigating the pressures of fame, scandal, and constant temptation. Mitchum's bad boy image wasn't just a screen persona. He lived loosely, ignored convention, and engaged in affairs that were well known within industry circles. Tabloids fed on it. Rumors followed him everywhere. And yet, Dorothy stayed. Not because the marriage was perfect, but because it was real. Through legal trouble, public controversy, and decades of temptation, their bond held. Mitchum never fully abandoned the idea of family, even when his choices tested its limits. Their relationship wasn't traditional, and it wasn't easy, but it endured. In an industry built on short-lived romances and quick exits, their marriage outlasted nearly everything around them. It was messy, flawed, and human, much like the man himself. And it's from that place, shaped by hardship, honesty, and lived experience, that Robert Mitchum would eventually speak the truth that left Hollywood unsettled. In the end, it all came to a close when Robert Mitchum passed away at the age of 79. But in the years leading up to his death, something changed. The man famous for his gravel, deep voice, brooding presence, and effortless cool began speaking more openly than he ever had before. Mitchum had never been a fan of Hollywood's carefully managed image machine. He didn't soften his words, didn't smooth the edges, and didn't pretend for the sake of comfort. And as time grew shorter, that blunt honesty only sharpened. What he said during those final interviews sent quiet shockwaves through the industry, not because he was chasing attention, but because he no longer felt any reason to protect illusions. When the name Charlton Heston came up, Mitchum didn't hesitate. In what would later be remembered as one of his last reflective conversations, Mitchum made it clear that Heston was not always what the public believed him to be. Not on screen, and not behind the curtain of public appearances. His words landed heavy, especially considering Heston's towering reputation as the embodiment of strength, honor, and classical Hollywood heroism. Mitchum didn't deny Heston's talent. He didn't dismiss his achievements, but he made it clear that the heroic image didn't tell the full story. People loved to put him on a pedestal, Mitchum said before pausing in a way that suggested he was choosing his next words carefully. Then he added that there was another side to Heston, one most fans never saw and never questioned. That single comment rippled through Hollywood because Heston's image had been almost untouchable for decades. To the public, Heston was larger than life. The commanding voice, the unshakable posture, the unforgettable performances in films that defined an era. He symbolized certainty in a world that liked its heroes clean and confident. But Mitchum hinted that behind that certainty lived something far more complicated. And this wasn't gossip. Mitchum made it clear his perspective came from decades spent inside the same rooms, navigating the same premieres, private gatherings, and studio power dynamics. You get to know people, he explained, when the cameras aren't rolling. And not everything, he added, matches the legend. That line mattered, because it wasn't just about one actor. It exposed a deeper Hollywood truth, the distance between public myth and private reality. Mitchum had always walked his own path. While others carefully polished their public image, he never pretended to be anything he wasn't. That refusal to perform extended to how he spoke about his peers. When he reflected on Heston, he didn't sound bitter or vengeful. He sounded observational, almost weary. He admitted Heston could be charming, even magnetic in the right room. But he also pointed out traits that made him difficult at times. Stubbornness, a need for control, a belief in his own authority that sometimes spilled beyond the screen. According to Mitchum, those qualities didn't always sit well with the people around him. This wasn't an attack, it was a portrait. Mitchum described Heston as a man carrying enormous expectations, both self-imposed and public, and struggling to reconcile that pressure with real human relationships. As Heston grew older, his outspoken political activism increasingly blurred the line between performer and persona. To Mitchum, that shift didn't come out of nowhere. He suggested those tendencies had been present even in the early days, shaping how Heston moved through Hollywood long before the public began noticing. They influenced his professional dealings, his friendships, and the way others responded to him once the doors were closed. And then Mitchum widened the lens. Hollywood friendships, he explained, were rarely simple. Some were genuine. Others were transactional. Many were built on convenience rather than connection. Polite smiles often hid quiet rivalries, and loyalty could dissolve the moment circumstances changed. People like to think stars all get along, Mitchum said, but he made it clear that Hollywood was business first, feelings second. In that environment, even long-standing relationships carried tension beneath the surface. Charlton Heston, Mitchum implied, was no exception. You never really know who's your friend, he said, and who's just playing a role when the cameras are off. That line cut deeper than it sounded, because it wasn't just commentary on Heston. It was a reflection on celebrity culture itself. Even among legends, the line between authenticity and performance was thin. Fame didn't erase competition. It magnified it. And still, Mitchum wasn't trying to tear anyone down. What he was doing was something far more unsettling, removing the armor. Behind the heroic poses and carefully maintained image was a real person, full of contradictions, ambition, pride, and insecurity. Not a symbol, not a monument, a man. There was something heavier in Mitchum's voice during these reflections. Speaking not long before his death, he sounded aware that time was closing in. He spoke like someone looking back with clarity rather than resentment. "When you've been around as long as I have," he said, "you start seeing the cracks in the masks people wear." He added that the real truth about someone is never found in magazines or polished interviews. It lives in quiet moments, private conversations, and the choices people make when no one is watching. And just as Mitchum began to explain where he believed those cracks truly showed, his tone shifted again, suggesting there was still more he hadn't said yet. It was something else entirely. What Robert Mitchum was trying to leave behind wasn't a scandal or an accusation, but something far more human. His words didn't land like gossip. They landed like perspective. And in many ways, they felt like a final offering from a man who had spent his entire life refusing to pretend. A reminder that screen legends are not flawless icons carved in stone, but complicated individuals hiding behind carefully constructed images. As the final chapter of Mitchum's life unfolded, the reputation that followed him for decades, the hard living, the defiance, the indifference to rules, eventually caught up with him in a way that could not be avoided. Mitchum had been a heavy smoker for most of his adult life. He picked up the habit long before the dangers of tobacco were widely acknowledged or taken seriously. Like many actors of his era, cigarettes were everywhere, on set, during interviews, and quiet moments between takes. In his private world, a cigarette rested in his hand as naturally as that half-lidded stare and laid-back grin. Over time, it became part of his identity. Smoking wasn't just a habit, it was woven into the image. The smoke, the silence, the worn masculinity, it all fed the legend audiences loved in noir films, westerns, and war movies alike. But time never forgets, and eventually it came to collect. In his later years, Mitchum was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was a slow, unforgiving illness that chipped away at the man who once seemed untouchable. Those close to him watched as fatigue set in, and breathing became harder. The physical strength that once defined him gave way to visible fragility, a stark contrast to the commanding presence he had carried for decades. For someone built on restraint and quiet power, the disease was relentless. It drained his body, but it never took his mind. Even as his condition worsened, Mitchum's sharp wit and dry humor remained intact. True to form, he faced the illness the same way he faced life, directly, without excuses. He never played the victim. He didn't romanticize his pain or chase sympathy. He avoided public sentimentality and spoke about his health with blunt realism. He understood that the habits he lived with for decades were now demanding their price, and he accepted that truth without denial. That mindset said everything about who he was. Mitchum didn't pretend innocence. He didn't rewrite his own story. He lived by a personal code rooted in honesty, fully aware of life's darker corners and unafraid to acknowledge them. There was no fake optimism, no manufactured hope, just clear-eyed acceptance. On July 1st, 1997, in Santa Barbara, California, Robert Mitchum passed away from complications related to lung cancer. He was 79 years old. His death wasn't just the loss of a legendary actor. It marked the closing of a Hollywood era, a time when stars were massive, flawed, and unapologetically human. An era when brilliance and excess often walked side by side. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, and critics. But what people remembered most wasn't just his talent. It was his presence. Mitchum could project menace, tenderness, irony, and exhaustion with the smallest shift in expression. His performances never felt staged. They felt lived in. And maybe that's the lasting truth he left behind, not just about himself, but about everyone he spoke of. Legends are real people first. Complex, contradictory, human. If you value stories like this and want more deep dives into classic Hollywood legends, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support truly helps keep these stories alive.